Here we go. Welcome back. Women on the edge. All of you guys, I can see you, and I know you guys are all a little bit on the edge because that's what we all are. We are women on the edge, but that's what our Bible study series is called right now. And what it is, it's just, in case you forgot, since we've been gone for a little bit, it's just women that I find who are on the edge of the stories that we're very commonly know, the stories in our Bible, that these women who are on the edge of the stories, in the sense of we may only have like a one little line about them, or we may only have a small little story and they can easily be skipped over. So we've talked about Hagar and Sarah, and we've talked about Rachel and Leah and Jacob, and we call that the two sisters, one mister. And this week we're going to talk about Tamar and Potiphar's wife. Very interesting combination. I don't know why it's ended up being me doing two women at once, but it's kind of been a fun little way of looking at this topic and these women, because comparing and contrasting and things like that has been important. I thought I was going to end up doing Potiphar's wife and Delilah, two shady ladies, but it's ended up being, I changed midway through because I thought I found something very interesting in the combination of these two remarkable, interesting, scandalous women. I've ended up kind of going through Genesis. This is kind of an accident. I really wasn't planning on just going chronologically through Genesis, but this is the way it's ended up, and it's been pretty interesting. I've definitely learned a few new things. So let's talk about these two women, and I'm calling this lesson The Art of Seduction. I don't know if you know much about these ladies. You probably think you know a lot about Potiphar's wife. You may not remember the story of Tamar. I'm going to throw that one at you. They are women who are used the powers that they had in a little bit different ways. I will tell you, though, a little bit of a trigger warning, actually a giant trigger warning. We're going to be talking about things that are very difficult topics, sexual issues and things like that. If you have small children in the room, you might shoo them away, or wear your headphones. Or if it's some topics that are maybe personally difficult for you to deal with from past trauma yourself, just I'm warning you now that there are difficult things. But throughout the Bible, we know well that the stories are not simple. They're not children's book stories. I was sort of thinking earlier, I wonder what if I ever taught the story when I was like a children's or youth pastor. I don't remember ever teaching the story of Joseph dealing with Potiphar's wife, and I was trying to remember what I would have said, and I couldn't remember. But it is a difficult story that we put in our Bibles, our little children's Bibles and stuff, and it's an interesting and very adult scene that happens. So we're going to take a look at these. I hope that you guys read your Bibles. I don't know if you guys all got the email and all got the homework assignment, but if you're just watching this later on, you might stop and read Genesis 37, 38, 39, right in there, those chapters to see what we're about to get into. So, as I said, in our last lesson, we talked about the lives of two women who were longing to be noticed, longing to be loved. Rachel and Leah, two wives of Jacob. He actually ended up with four wives that we know of, because Bilhah and Zilpah, the maidservants, the slaves of Rachel and Leah, ended up being his wives and providing him children as well. Ended up being those 12 tribes of Israel, the patriarchs, the OGs of our Christianity, of the 12 tribes. The stories of these three, Leah, Rachel, and Jacob, later called Israel, is full of deception, it's full of ambition, it's full of trickery, and these stories are full of depth. In just a few little chapters, we get a whole lot of information about who these people are, their sorrows, their ambition, their desire, the manipulation and control that they use to try to get what they need and want. And need is a really big word, especially for the women. And within these stories, we find one woman in particular who had found the ability to praise God while going through intense loneliness, intense sorrow and rejection. That would be Leah. In ancient times, when we are reading about what we were reading about in Genesis, women were pretty much only appreciated for their ability to produce heirs, especially male heirs. But Leah, she wanted more. She wanted to actually be loved. She was abused. She was used. She wanted love. She wanted to be noticed. She wanted to be recognized. And you can see as she named each of her children, you can see the progression of her heart until she finally, at one point, sort of mid-child bearing, she has Judah, who she ends up naming Praise, and she is able to give praise to God. And the other children their names have to do with I long for my husband to see me. I long to be noticed. I will now be declared, blessed to all the other women in the village, kind of a thing. Those are the names of her other children, but there is one where she is able to praise God in the midst of this abuse and this longing. So very intense, very intimate look at this woman and all of the situation that was going on around. Once again, a woman on the edge of the bigger story, which is the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the stories of the founding of Israel and the Jewish people and God's covenant with his people, but through this very patriarchal lens. But it doesn't take, if you're willing to look, you're going to see the women as well. So the Old Testament is this history of God choosing flawed people to be a part of a bigger story than themselves. The characters in the Joseph story are another example of very flawed characters being a part of this bigger story. So Jacob has these 12 sons, and they are at the center point of the entire rest of the Bible. Everything has to do with these 12 sons and the tribes of Israel and the interaction of the tribes and the kingdoms that come from them, and then eventually the Jewish race, the Hebrew people, the Hebrew nation, and then the Gentiles and how they interact with them as we get into the New Testament. But everything is centered around this beginnings story of these 12 sons. So we have the original schemer. We've got Jacob, who has all these kids, how he plays favorites. We've got his son is born, the goody two shoes Joseph. We know about him. He's when he's little, he's tattling on his brothers. He talks about his dreams that seem to be pretty prophetic, but he starts getting on even his father's nerves. And then we got his big bro, we got Reuben, and then we got Judah, and how they seem to be vying for like a position of leadership among the brothers, and they're kind of got their own schemes and their own plans that they're trying to work. And you see that in the story of, we're not going to go into it, but you see it if you're reading through the story of when they threw Joseph in the pit and things like that. You see Reuben and Judah and how they're interacting with the other brothers through all that. So this whole story is full of all these interesting narratives. So Genesis 37, and there's a reason I'm pointing out where we're starting here, but Genesis 37, we begin to see this story of Joseph. We know that we ended last lesson with Rachel and Leah just having all these kids. She gives birth to Joseph, and then she gives birth to Benjamin, and then shortly thereafter she passes away, and it's just the 12 boys and the families. But the next chapters, in chapter 37, we begin to see the story of Joseph. Joseph goes, and the very important story of Joseph, we see this till the end of Genesis. So basically, so Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife, and she'd been barren for a very long time, and she finally gives birth to Joseph and then to Benjamin, and then Rachel dies, and Joseph becomes the favorite. He's daddy's favorite, and everybody knows it. And it's crazy how well they know it, because he gets a cool coat and everything. Most of us know this story. The favorite son of the favorite wife, his father gives him this beautiful coat. It's referred to as ornate. They don't really actually even know what that ancient Hebrew word means, ornate, coat of many colors, ornate coat. It's definitely some sort of jacket that makes him stand out. At one point, apparently it's so great that his brothers could see him at a great distance coming, and gave them plans, gave them time to plan out an entire way of killing him. That's how ornate this coat was, that they could see him from that far away. We are told Joseph has these two dreams, And these dreams seem to be like the final straw that causes his brothers to resent him, and then they end up making plans to kill him. So we got big bro Reuben, I believe he's the oldest, Leah's son, and he convinces them to just don't kill him. Let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in the pit. And then he plans on coming back a little bit later because he has to go somewhere, and then he plans to secretly coming back and rescuing him. But while he's away, the others like, oh well, we got him in this pit. Maybe we can make a little money. So these Ishmaelite traders come by and they end up selling him to them for 20 pieces of silver. The brothers soak Joseph's coat in goat blood, and they present it to their father, and they tell him that Joseph has been killed by wild beasts. And then we end up jumping over to Genesis 39 to get more of the story of Joseph. Joseph ends up this slave in the house of Potiphar, and Potiphar is this high-ranking Egyptian official. Egypt is a very big part of this story, where they end up in Egypt, him being an Egyptian official, and of course the whole story of Egypt becomes a huge part, another major player, a character almost in this story of the Hebrews for a different day. Joseph is described in the Bible, he is described as a handsome, very intelligent, obviously he's a born leader, very good looking and well built, it says. Even in the midst of slavery, of him being in the house of Potiphar, God is with him. He blesses him. He must be speaking to him. We know he already spoke to him in dreams, and then later on he speaks to him in more dreams. He has just this successful godly touch on everything that he does. And Potiphar notices that God is blessing him, and he puts him in charge of his entire household. And it says that so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. This little verse right here, though, we're gonna highlight this little part. You may have skipped it in your past readings, but when he says it does not concern him with anything except the food he ate, interesting way of saying that. Some believe that Potiphar may have been a eunuch. A eunuch is someone who has had been physically probably castrated, and is not able to have children. Usually eunuchs were put in charge of a king's harem. That way they could not have any kind of relations with the harem itself. Other scholars have said it's kind of unlikely that he was in charge of the harem. Well, it doesn't say. He says he was captain of the guard, and he wasn't with the harem, and he had a wife, so he probably wasn't a eunuch. But this little part where it says except the food that he ate, it may be this kind of a sly suggestion, a Bible-y way of saying that he wasn't exactly, they may have been very obese. He may have really only cared mostly about food, didn't really have any great sexual prowess in the bedroom or with his wife, maybe didn't care about that kind of thing. So maybe sort of alluding to that kind of thing, which is important to the story. And it may be, was not, and so he may have been a guy who wasn't pleasing his wife, and she wanted a little bit more, possibly. We don't really know this for sure, but that may be what that means. But we know that he definitely trusted Joseph, and he and Joseph had a very good relationship as far as running the house. He didn't really have to think about anything at all. Completely trusted him. For a while, nothing happens. It just says that Joseph has been in this house for a while. He's running the house. And then this other character comes into the story, Potiphar's wife. She's basically like Desperate Housewives, the Egypt edition. And Joseph's like the clean-cut, good-looking pool boy, and she just keeps messing with him. I know none of you guys have ever seen Desperate Housewives, but but this is kind of that edition. She's knows what she wants. She's portrayed as this woman who is sex starved, or at least sex desiring, and she's going after the one who is right in front of her. And we don't know really anything else about her. We don't really know very much about her. We assume she's Egyptian. We don't know her name. It's kind of frustrating. It'd be nice to be able to call her something like, some crazy named Egyptian name. I'm not going to just throw things out there, but anyway, but we just have to call her Potiphar's wife. And that's an interesting way of putting it, that she's a wife. she belongs or was with someone else. And this is how Joseph sees her. Joseph connects with her only in the sense of this is his master's wife. She also is his master. She's a part of the household. I'm quite sure Potiphar was gone a lot, and Joseph did have to deal with her and listen to her in a sense, but still Potiphar was in charge. So Joseph is very pleased. Potiphar is pleased with him and is given free reign in the house. He's very good looking. He catches the eye of Potiphar's wife, and she commands Joseph to sleep with her. Joseph refuses. He explains to her why. He said this would be a sin against his master and to his God. And this is the verse where it says, now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. So in this passage where she asked him to come to bed, he refuses to go to bed with her or even to be with her. And then one day it says he went into the house to attend to his duties. None of the household servants were inside. Very important point. She caught him by his cloak and says, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and he ran out of the house. Good job, Joseph. When she saw that he had left his cloak and had run out of the house, that's when she got really ticked off and probably a little embarrassed, or a whole lot embarrassed. And she called the house servants back and she says, look what this Hebrew has done. It's kind of a big deal that she refers to him as a Hebrew, definitely distinguishing him from who she is. And look, he's making fun of us. He came here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When you heard me scream, you left his cloak behind. Look, here it is right here. She kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. And then she told him, look, this story, the Hebrew slave you brought came to me and made sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak behind and ran out of the house. Look, here it is right here. Poor helpless me. So that's the story. She's sticking with it. Because of his position in the Egyptian government, in order to save the honor of his wife, Potiphar had to do something. Now, it seems, based on the fact that he did not immediately have Joseph killed, that he possibly did believe that Joseph was innocent, and he did not believe his wife, but he needed to save honor because she was probably a big mouth around town, and she needed she would probably let people know what had happened. She already had been screaming, and so he had to send him to prison. Because he didn't kill him, though, it does appear that he didn't believe his wife. Kind of important. It does speak to Potiphar and definitely to Joseph's honor and to their relationship. The story is pretty straightforward. We see Joseph as this hero. We've all probably heard this story in Sunday school. We know about this hero who manages to withstand this harassment from this woman. And even though he's sent to prison, he for this injustice, he has integrity, hard work, and faith in God, and it continues to make him successful, even though that he dealt with the jealousy and spite of and vengefulness of his brothers, and then even of this ungodly vengeful woman and her issues. He was able to continue to be successful. A great story, a story that all youth pastors love to tell. Pastors from the pulpit love to tell this story because it is about this wonderful, strong person who stood up for what was right and what was true, and kept their eyes on the prize of what God expected, what integrity was, what honor and truth was. But if we're really paying attention, we notice that this great story of Joseph, this man who always seems to be in a mess, but has God's favor, has this interruption in it. Remember, we went from chapter 37 to chapter 39. And immediately after the chapter 37 chapters, if you have your Bible, you can open it up right now. You can see in chapter 37, that's the story of Joseph when he's a kid and he's telling this, we see about him telling about his dreams and getting his coat, and his brothers getting mad at him and sending him off to Potiphar's house into slavery. And then all of a sudden there's a break. Chapter 38 all of a sudden is a totally different story. And when you're reading it, I know I've read through this in the past, and I think, what in the heck? Why is this? I just want to read the Joseph story. I don't even understand what's going on here. But there's this, all of a sudden there's this whole chapter, this story about Judah, big bro Judah, and Tamar. And then chapter 39, it goes back to the story that we just talked about, which is him being in Potiphar's house and having to deal with Potiphar's wife. So let's figure out what's going on. Chapter 38. So why is this story interrupted? And it's a really crucial point. It's like, okay, well, we got this great story going on with Joseph. He's just really important. He's like super important. Why are we this being interrupted? Now, don't yell at me, Deborah. I'm a tiny spoiler alert, but I was just reading this book the other day where the Crawdads Sing. Some of y'all may have read it. It's a great book. It's
oh no.
Stop. I'm not. Stop. She got mad at me because I told the story of Moana a couple weeks ago. It's only like an 8-year-old movie. Okay, no, I'm not. Stop. I'm not telling the story. I'm just saying in this book, they do something very similar. Hold on. There's a murder, and then you have to figure out who did it. But it's like it's the opening sentence. Come on, it's the opening sentence of the book. You know immediately there's a murder. But within the story, it goes back and forth in time. You see what's going on in current times, and you see what's going on in history, in decades before, and it goes back and forth. And it takes you a little while. The first couple of chapters, you're like, hey, what's going on here? Then you realize how it's going back and forth. It's a literary device that is important for the story. Without that going back and forth, you could still tell the story. You could tell the story chronologically, but the way the characters begin to understand who they are, and for you as the reader to understand the importance of these of what they're learning, and then what happens, in the end, and how the case gets solved and how everything resolves itself, has to do with us learning who these people are when it goes back and forth. So a modern book, I'm giving a modern example of what was happening in this Genesis story. A story that is not told chronologically is trying to get our attention. That is what's happening in Genesis. It's trying to get our attention to this other strange little story of Judah and this woman Tamar that we're about to meet. Same device. So how are these stories, Joseph and Judah, these brothers who did not get to really grow up together, but how are they intertwined? We're going to look into that. Okay, so we're going to get into the middle now, chapter 38, if you're opening your Holy Bibles. Chapter 38, the story of Judah and Tamar. It seems out of place, but it occurs during this really dramatic moment in this history of Joseph and in the family. Remember, this is about the whole family and the covenant that God has made with this family. That's what this second half of Genesis is about. Once you get to the Tower of Babel, and then the Abraham story starts, and the covenant with Abraham, and from there to the end of Genesis is the story of this family, and of course obviously on to the rest of Old Testament, but the story of Genesis from Abraham to the end is about this family. And so everything, not just the cool Joseph story and how he's like this great guy, but everything within these brothers matters. So Judah has, we find out in this chapter 38, Judah has 3 sons, and he grows old. In this one chapter, he has kids. He grows, his wife, he gets old. He becomes a widow, and all this stuff. And Joseph has just been, from the chapter before, Joseph was only 17 years old, and then all of a sudden we have his brother Judah. He's got 3 kids, and this whole big story unfolds in this one chapter. So we take this deeper look, and we see these parallels between these 2 stories. Okay, this is a tough chapter. It's hard to understand in our modern mindset how this works. If you're reading through Genesis and you see these stories that we've already talked about, we talked about Sarah and Hagar, Rachel and Leah, these women who, and even Potiphar's wife, we find women who have a need to have children. That is how they recognize. Now, often it is said women in those days were just property. Kind of true, not totally true. I mean, it's not like they were, oxen or something like that. But they didn't really have a lot of legal rights. Later on, Moses begins to give them more rights as the law is written and things like that. But within the Levitical law and stuff, you see a little bit more, but they're not, it wasn't totally like they were treated like animals or property. They were, but they weren't. Definitely by modern sense, they definitely had no rights in the sense that we understand them now. This really important chapter, though, is about, we know how Joseph, saved the family from famine, but this story gives us a little bit more depth. So So we have Jacob. That's Joseph and Judah's daddy. He has just been given the coat. End of chapter 37. Just been given this coat, and he's sad. He says, they say, "Oh, look, Dad, we think that Joseph was killed by a wild animal. Look, here's some blood on his really special coat. We know you love his coat." Anyway, so they give him this coat, and then boom, Judah shows up, and he says he has 3 sons, one after another. Boom, boom, boom. He has 3 sons, and Judah, he all of a sudden is walking in grief too, because we find out really quickly that his oldest son gets married. Yay, he gets married. But then it says that he marries a woman named Tamar. And then we read that that this son is killed. He dies, and it says because he was wicked in the sight of the Lord. The Lord killed or put to death So Tamar, his wife, all of a sudden is a widow. And then Tamar becomes another one of these women in our Genesis stories that is full of pain. Another one. We have Sarah, who was barren. We have Hagar, who was thrown out of the household, and with her son Ishmael. We have Leah, who was in pain. We have Rachel, who was a favorite but was barren for a long time and in pain. Another woman in Genesis, a woman on the edge of the story who was in great pain. So she lost her husband. So Judah has his second son, Onan, and he says, "Onan, you need to marry Tamar. That's your brother's widow. That's your duty. You need to do that." In ancient times, if a man dies without leaving any heir, it was the obligation of his next of kin, usually his brother, to marry the widow and then have a son. But then this son would be the heir of the first brother of that brother, not the one who had made him. So he would have been Er's son. Well, Onan didn't like that deal. It says that Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Boom, we're just losing sons left and right here. So having lost 2 sons who were connected to Tamar, it kind of makes her in Judah's eyes like a bad risk, like, ooh, she's bad luck. Of course it's her fault, I guess. And so he's got another son, Shelah, and he says, okay, yeah, I'll make you a promise, but he really doesn't intend to keep this promise. He tells Tamar, "Stay as a widow, go to your father's house, go back home where you were raised, until my son Shelah grows up." And he thought, well, Shelah would die like his brothers had. So Tamar went and lived with her in her father's house. So what it's saying is he sent her away, and he said, "Oh yeah, when Shelah gets old enough, he'll be able to provide you a son. He'll do his brotherly duties." But he really didn't want that to happen. So by sending her away, he kind of kept her out of the picture and hoped that it would just get kind of be done with and he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. So he deceives Tamar, and if you remember in our stories, there's a lot of deception in this family, by seeming to promise Shelah services when he grows up, but in fact, he is getting her out of the household, back to her father's house, and on top of that, he tells her, "You must remain a widow." He does not release her from his own family and the connection, the covenant in the family as a bride. I don't know how that would have been done, but he doesn't do that. Oh, remember the story with Ruth, and her husband dies, and everybody dies in her family, and Naomi says, "It's okay, I release you, go back," and she says, "No, I'm sticking with you." Well, Tamar didn't even have that choice. She was required to stay within the family, but she didn't get to hang out anymore. She didn't get to, hang out with Shelah and teach him how to be a good husband or anything. It would have, I don't even know how old Shelah was, but I'm sure it wouldn't have been very exciting to watch him grow up. It would have been acceptable for Judah himself, the dad. It would have been within legal rights for him to be a surrogate daddy under the customs of the day. In fact, he was actually obligated to do it, or to release her to go remarry. And Judah did not do that. He just made her this promise, "Shelah, you can have him later, or he'll have you later," and then got rid of her. So he was not doing what he was supposed to do. In those days, women had no legal recourse, and so Tamar is faced with this very serious choice. She has to submit to Judah's authority or come up with her own plan, a way to conceive within this family. It had to be within the family. She couldn't just go off and have a family somewhere else and be like, well, I'm already in dad's house. I'm back home. I'll just go do what I want. She had to stick within the rules, but she knew how to work within the rules. So when Tamar recognizes this truth that Judah wasn't ever going to give her to Sheila, things become very interesting. Years later, it says that Judah's wife dies. So Judah, Big Daddy Judah, becomes a widow, and then it says he goes to town. He has this friend, something starts with an A, and he goes off to town with him. And they like, hey, let's go hang out. We're gonna go to town. And so Tamar finds out about his plan. So she puts her plan into action. She had a few years to work this out. So we find out that Judah is going into town, and apparently getting a prostitute is sort of a normal thing for Judah, because Tamar anticipates that that's what he's going to do. So she dresses as a prostitute. She goes to the town, she dresses as a prostitute, and she puts herself in the place that she knows that he will find her. There's a particular corner where all the prostitutes hang out, and she catches his eye. And he asks for her services, and so she says, oh, okay, well, what's your payment? He says, I'll give you a goat for your services. And she was like, well, how am I going to get the goat? Why don't and he says, well, what do you want? And she says, well, give me your seal, your cord, and your staff. And it's sort of like, his ID, it's like leaving your driver's license or something. I mean, it was the thing that would help him to be recognized later on. So he says, okay. So 3 months later, Tamar is back with her family, and she is pregnant. And Judah finds out. He's told Tamar is pregnant. He's like, how dare she? Bring her out here so she may be burned. And he wants her killed because he believes that she has done this evil thing and gone off and gotten herself pregnant and with someone else. And so now Tamar says, I can now reveal the truth of the trap that has been set. So once she shows him, and she says, well, I mean, the father is the one who owns these things, these tokens, the seal, the cord, the staff. And he realizes what's happened. He realizes who she is, and that he is the dad. And he declares, she is more righteous than I am. And these events become a huge turning point. This chapter becomes a huge turning point in the life of Judah. And it helps us to understand why later on in the chapters where we see all the brothers having to go to Egypt, where Joseph is now second in command of all of Egypt, and he's dealing with the famine, and the brothers come, and he says, one of you has stolen something, and and then the whole thing with Benjamin comes, and he says, I'll have to keep this brother Benjamin until you do these things that I want you to do. And Judah offers himself in the place of Benjamin, because he knows how sad his father will be if he loses another son of Rachel. And this is part of that process that Judah went through. So these later chapters in the life of Joseph and the brothers and Judah and the patriarchs of this family all come to a turning point in this chapter with Judah, where his life, his eyes are opened to what grief is. His eyes are open to what true righteousness is. His eyes are open to what it means to sacrifice, and a major part of the entire story that we know of Genesis with Joseph. So these events in chapter 38, Judah learns what it feels like to lose sons, just like his father had lost a son, and what it means to want to protect the youngest, like he tried to protect Sheila, but he did it without integrity. Judah had come to know what it means to do whatever it takes to stand up for a principle. Earlier, oh, Joseph, we're going to throw him in a pit. Yeah, okay, I'll come back and I'll deal with it later. But now he sees, oh, this is what it means to have this kind of grief. He learned this from Tamar. He didn't learn it from his daddy. He didn't even learn it from the situation with Joseph. He learned it from Taylor, what real true righteousness was Tamar. I think I said Taylor. Tamar took matters into her own hands. She knew she was being sinned against. Now, the end of the story, the end of this chapter, we find out that she gives birth to twin boys, very, very important twin boys. Their names are Perez and Zerah. The younger of the two. Now, if you remember the story, you remember, because I actually got this story confused with when Jacob and Esau were born, and I was like, wait, where's that story? This is the story where the babies are sort of fighting in the womb, and one of them sticks its hand out of the womb as it's being born, and they go, oh, that's the firstborn, and they wrap a red cord around the baby, ties a little string to the baby, and then the baby goes back in, and then the other baby comes out. Well, that's Perez and Zerah, and the younger of those two, Perez, is actually the ancestor, the great grandpa of Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth. Ruth becomes the great grandmother. Ruth and Boaz become the great grandparents of King David, and of course, then the ancestor of the Messiah, Jesus. So Tamar doing what she did, Judah being the daddy, and the twin boys that they have end up being the ancestors of the king, and then of course the greatest king, King Jesus, the Messiah. And also Tamar, go all the way to Matthew 1, the genealogy of Jesus. Tamar is the first woman listed. There are 4 women listed in the genealogy. Tamar, Perez, Zerah, Ruth, all of them are mentioned, and all because of this moment, this little chapter that kind of gets in our way of the Joseph story. This really important chapter because of what Tamar did, the history, the genealogy of Jesus, of Boaz, of all of these are set. Very interesting little chapter, wouldn't you agree? There are Bible commentaries that refer to Tamar, though, as adulterous, or as vengeful, or as just, oh, she's a prostitute, how dare she do this? But we have to look, I think just by listening to me talk, you know that I don't think that, but there have been those who believe that what she did was wrong, was a sin. Her own daddy-in-law, baby daddy, doesn't believe so, but there are some who believe that she was in sin. But by Israelite standards, she was very justified in her attempt to get Judah to carry out his responsibilities. He had unjustly, unrighteously, unfairly deprived her of children, an inheritance, of an opportunity to remarry. He had shut down everything that who she was. You know, for women, that's kind of all they had, be able to produce heirs, to be able to be connected with family, to have an inheritance, to have somebody provide for them in old age, to take care of them, somebody to take care of. He forced her into barrenness, and God does not approve of that. And we know that from Judah, it says Zechariah, from Judah will come the cornerstone. Zechariah says, meaning, of course, we know of Jesus, but from Judah, it took this strong, powerful, scheming, you might say, woman to get this to happen. If it had not been for her, none of those things would have happened. Potiphar's wife, now let's go back to Potiphar's wife and Joseph. She also may have been childless. The text doesn't tell us, but she may have wanted Joseph to give her a child. That may have been the whole point of what she was doing as well. I couldn't get a child from this man who just wants to sit around and eat all day. I want some children. And Joseph, hey, you look like the kind of guy that I would pick out of the book of guys who will make me have good children. Yeah, you're the guy. I want you, handsome. You're smart and handsome and good looking, and I think I'll have a good time with you. So I'll pick you. And really, it actually would have been socially acceptable in the Egyptian culture for her to have relations with a slave. Actually, in Hebrew culture too, we know about what Abraham did, what Jacob did with the slaves that were brought to them. Because their wives couldn't have children at certain times, they would say, well, here's my slave. And as long as it was the wife that brought her, then it was considered acceptable for the husband, her husband, to sleep with someone else. There was a whole ritual of things that we won't go into, that of how it happened to make it all this threesome into more of a twosome, interestingly enough, but it was a part of the culture. And it was probably part of the culture as well for the Egyptians if Potiphar had approved. But Joseph tells her, well, okay, I know you want to do that, and I get it, yeah, maybe, but that's not what the master says. He doesn't approve, and I didn't get that memo, so we're not going to do it the way you want. So he refuses her proposition, and he claims that this would be a sin against God, and also against, he refers to his master Potiphar as well. He's got a very good code of ethics, and he's going to stick with him. And within this larger account, the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, it demonstrates, of course, we all know Joseph's strong moral character, and it sets the stage for this rise to power, because we know he ends up going to prison and then being recognized in prison for his integrity, his hard work, his dream telling, interpreting, and all of those things become a part of what takes him eventually into power in Egypt. Unlike Tamar, Potiphar's wife is depicted as a temptation for Joseph to avoid, and for Judah and Tamar, a very different situation. So Joseph and Judah become these prominent brothers in this part of Genesis. Joseph and Judah become the most prominent brothers in the history of this family. Of course, we can look deep into the Old Testament, into the New Testament. We can see, King David coming from Judah, and we can see Jesus, of course, coming from Judah. But they don't know this at the time. They don't realize what's going on, and the writers of Genesis didn't understand all of that. Joseph and Judah are the most prominent, but it's easy to overlook the women that figure into these stories, the women on the edge. Tamar and Potiphar's wife might seem at first to have nothing to do with each other. They seem very different. Potiphar's wife doesn't even get her own name, but she's got this very handsome slave named Joseph. Tamar is a Canaanite woman. She's been banished to obscurity until she plays the harlot, the prostitute, and pulls one over on her father-in-law. That's how we see these women in these quick little chapters of our book. And these characters are very the same and also very different. Their stories are told side by side for a reason. There has to be a connection between these two women, between these two stories. So they're likely arranged back to back to highlight Joseph's sexual purity as a mirror to Judah's immorality in sleeping with a prostitute. That's one of the connections that we can make as a mirror to each other. And it's important to note that scholars often interpret these two stories of patriarchs and prostitutes, how they interpret it. They show admiration for Tamar's cunning deception while simultaneously condemning Potiphar's wife for wanting the same thing. Remember, there was really no birth control except for the way Onan was doing it. So a woman who was wanting sex in order to have a child, that was normal. You needed sex. There probably wasn't like, hey, I just want to have a nice time tonight. It was, I want sex because I want a child. Now, I'm telling you these things as a possibility for Potiphar's wife, that she may have been simply like, well, I just want a kid. My husband's a creep. He only wants to eat, turkey legs, and I want a kid. It's possible. Now, there is a difference though, because she ends up being like telling lies about Joseph. Tamar has very good righteous reasons for what she does. So I'm not trying to make Potiphar's wife sound better, but I'm just trying to say that there's a different way of looking at her than just a slut, really, is what I'm trying to say. She may not have been, she may have had a good reason. It's just that she went about it in a really, really bad way. So both Tamar and Potiphar's wife, they act in uncommon ways, but to achieve their goals. Their goals may just, well, for Potiphar's wife, I'm guessing here, but it's possible that it may just be that she wanted a kid. Both use their bodies to get what they want. Tamar pretends to be a prostitute, not because she's looking for a good time, because she desperately wants a child. Same may be true for Potiphar's wife. She's condemned as being an immoral slut. Tamar's praised as righteous. It's important to ask why. We have to ask the questions. Now, it may be obvious, and I've been kind of alluding to it, and you guys probably already have figured it all out, but But when we read these kind of stories, we have to ask why. We have to go, well, these stories, there's a lot of sex going on here. Why is this writer telling these stories? How do they relate? And we need to connect, because otherwise we can just like skip right through and like, I already know the story, Joseph. Oh yeah, there's that weird story of Tamar. I don't know what's going on there. I'm gonna jump right over that one, get to the good stuff with the famine and all that stuff. So Tamar and Potiphar's wife provide examples of the way these female characters are depicted throughout the Bible stories. Women are usually on the edges of the most important narratives, and sometimes, and usually they're just like, oh, that's the wife, that's the daughter, that's the sister. She provided this son, she provided an heir. Oh, she provided a daughter. The daughter got in trouble. Somebody did something, and we got to look closer, you guys. The primary function of women in pretty much most of these stories, it seems like, is to bear children. It's not true, but it does seem that way, because it seems like, oh, they got another kid. Look, the kid turned out to be a good guy. The kid turned out to be a bad guy. We got Samson and his mom crying out to the Lord, Hannah crying out to the Lord, and we can just skip to the Samson part, and we're missing the Hannah part. We can get to the King David with all the women he was with, the Bathsheba story and the Abigail story and different ones. And we can just think about the King David part and forget about Abigail saved the life of her husband, or Bathsheba was raped and what happened with her in her life, and how she ended up being, an important part of the story, but not of her choice. Those kind of things are important. We have to look deeper at them. Every action that these people take is an effort to make these women, to make themselves useful by having sons. They did what they could because that was the only way they knew to inject themselves into the story. Have sons, have children, provide an inheritance. And they did it. They kept doing it. And that was God declared that a righteous thing. He understood the culture. He understood what was happening there. And he condemned those who would not give that, to allow those women to do that. The children of Jacob, of Judah, who, like Onan and what he did to Tamar, God considered that wicked. He understood what was going on within that culture and what was going on with those women and the importance of what they needed. And that doesn't mean that that's our primary goal and objective now as women in our modern society, but God understood what was going on with them then. And of course, I didn't know that he believes that he does that same for us now. But a childless woman in the Bible, whether she was unmarried or widowed, had better find herself a husband. That's the way they thought. That's the way everyone thought. And if she is married without children, she better find a way to change her status somehow. You don't see some woman, until you get to Proverbs 31, you don't really see a whole lot of women going out going, I think I'll start a little entrepreneurial business. Yeah, I'll have a job. I'll sell stuff. Yeah, it'll be cool. I'll make money. They didn't get to do that. They didn't have a lot of options. So they either had to be surrogates, or they had to like pray really hard, or they had to seek a blessing like Hannah did from Eli, who thought she was drunk. It was all about getting kids. So if you read like these chapters 34 to 39, you see these stories, they dive into these sexual immoralities of the patriarchs. I mean, you see the great moral standard of Joseph, but chapter 34 through 39 and pretty much everywhere, but these stories you see, the sons are born of Jacob, the 12 sons. This one's getting in trouble by going off with this one. This one's over here getting in trouble. Reuben got in trouble, I think, with a woman. I mean, they're just all kinds of mayhem, sexual immorality going on with the patriarchs. Joseph, good thing he got sent away because he figured out how to do it right. I guess those dreams that he had from the Lord helped out. He definitely got some good lessons at some point from his daddy that the rest of the kids didn't get. It paid to be the favorite, apparently, because he got the right lessons and understood what he was supposed to do, what the moral standard was that he needed to uphold. So Judah's actions are contrasted within these passages with Joseph, and then Tamar is contrasted with Potiphar. That's the way it's usually done. So we got good sex, bad sex. Oh, Tamar's good sex, bad sex. Is that really what it's all about? No, it's not what it's all about. If we just talk about these lessons about sexual morality or immorality, we are going to miss the whole point. So bigger context to modern times, women are often told these stories, and we're put into like, are you a good girl or a bad girl? Don't act like Potiphar's wife. Don't be a bad girl. Don't be doing that kind of stuff. And we're put into this category. It's a very purity culture kind of thing. We have to deal with the modesty talks. You got to dress better. You got to not show too much skin, too little of this or that. You have to act and behave in a certain way. These purity culture concepts that make us feel less than just because we're a woman, because we have boobs, because we have a curve. We're told, I was just told the other day about someone who a camp that they're telling the counselors who come, and it's not even a Christian camp, it's just a campground, but the woman is a Christian who's one of the leaders, and she says, well, anybody who's a counselor, all you women, you can't wear leggings and you can't wear this and you can't wear that. And you're going, really, really easiest thing to buy for women, and you're telling us what we can't. Why? Because we're going to cause a problem for, for the boys. It's all part of what we've been taught all this time. And I don't know if you ever read this book. There's this book called Bad Girls of the Bible. It's been out for like 20 years or something. It's got, it's got Potiphar's wife, and it's got Delilah and Jezebel and all these. But I found this funny, not funny, it's actually terrible. This little Bible study thing, a little clipping from it that somebody had put on one of my Facebook places that I look at, and it's the Bible study, and it's got these questions. Like, one of the questions that you're supposed to do when you do your little Bible study after you read the book is, do you think that Mrs. Potiphar might have done, what might she have done to honor her husband and her marriage vows and garner his attention? So so the question is not about looking deeper into the story like we're trying to do, but if you're going to read this story, you need to think, if you're a wife, don't be like Potiphar's wife. You need to take care of your husband, because it's all her fault that her husband, eats too much or something. I don't know. And another question, the one at the bottom, had something to do with Proverbs 26:6 suggests that faithful men are few and far between, but that doesn't mean we are blameless if a married man looks our way. How can you avoid catching the eye of such a man? This is the BS that women are being taught in these silly little Bible studies. This is happening all the time. This is probably happening in some Bible study being taught tonight somewhere, someplace, somebody who's doing it, or at your local Bible church or Bible school or something else, or just by your own family, that women have to be careful. And it's and these stories, especially the Potiphar's wife story, the Joseph story, is really about men and how we need to be careful not to be bringing the wrong attention, and we have to change the way we think about those things. We have to speak into young women. We have to, even to ourselves, and say, you're okay. You're being a woman is a good thing. God is looking at who you are, the spirit of you. He's not looking at whether you're male or female. He's saying, I've called you to be a leader. I've called you to be wise. I've called you to use the gifts. I've called you to be filled with the Spirit. I'm empowering you to do anything, and you're empowered to do anything I want. And even in a marriage, it is not about men leading. Guys, you all know that. I know we all should know by now that's not what those Bible verses say. That is not what God is telling women, that we're supposed to be under men in leadership in the homes and marriages and all that BS. It's not true. It's not biblical. It's heresy, actually, because it's keeping women down. But we have to be careful. We have to look and see these little nods to this. And a passage like the Potiphar's wife stuff is not how it is used against women a lot. So I'm just throwing this in there to say we have to be careful. Instead of this story of Potiphar's wife being used to shame women, it should point to Joseph and say, look, he had control of himself. He made good choices. This is an example for men and for women. This is a great example. This is not just a story about a guy sticking it out, just like the story that we talked about a while back, where Jacob, waited for his woman Rachel for 7 years and all this stuff. And look, it's a great example of how men should be willing to wait for their wives to be given to them. It's not what it's about, you guys. This is a godly example of a human being that obeyed God, and I'm glad he was a man. I'm glad he did it, and but there's a whole bunch of horrible stories about the men in Genesis who did horrible things to women as well. So there's men and women who are on both sides of the spectrum here. And Tamar is the essence of biblical womanhood, really true womanhood. She did not accept the fate that was given to her, put on her by someone else in authority over her. She knew the truth. She had to work within the culture. She worked within the rules, but she did not accept the fate that was given to her. She knew what her calling was. It was about having a kid. She understood it. She knew it. She went for it, and she took what was hers. She did what she had to do. These are true biblical men and women. They didn't fit into simple little roles that we're told. They did what they were supposed to do according to what God showed them that they were to do. Tamar's choice to get a child through a scheme was called righteous. That means it was justified. What she did was the right thing to do. She acted, portrayed herself, went into did a costume to fool a man who was doing evil to her. It was righteous. She had a just reason for doing it. Tamar was a woman of integrity who made this creative unorthodox way to fulfill the duty that she had to herself, to her family. Her family had already married her off. They didn't want her back in the household. Her daddy and her mama, her siblings, whoever was in the household, were like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in that other household. Why are you with us? And she knew she wasn't in the right place. She knew where she was supposed to be. She knew she was supposed to be connected to. She was supposed to be connected to Judah's family and to the family of Abraham and to that covenant. She was a very complex human being. It looks like she had wisdom and insight and an understanding of righteousness and justice, and she did what she needed to do. We can see very similar complexities of a person in Leah, who we talked about in the other study. She was called ugly. She named her children according to the pain that she was experiencing. This is a very complex woman. And then before that, Hagar, a woman who once again had this thrust upon her this role of being a surrogate who provided the firstborn Ishmael, but then was kicked out, rejected by the baby daddy, by Abraham, by Sarah, and then had to go back, and then had to leave again. But she was the one who ended up being able to be the first ever to name God, to say, God sees me. These are very complex women on the edges of these very intense stories of the covenant God had made with the man Abraham, but with really the people of this time. Well-behaved women, as we know, rarely make history. That's what we can see through all of these women that are on the edge. Didn't always behave the right way, didn't do what was expected of them, didn't fit into stupid little roles that somebody else gave them, but said, I will live righteously. I will do what is required of me by God, even if the men around me are not. The same act of initiative, feminine initiative of a woman using her body to get what she wants could be a bad thing when it is done selfishly. When it is done for noble motives, it is worthy of praise, as in Tamar. In First Samuel, when it's talking about David and Samuel the priest is looking for who should be named the next king, it says that God looks at the heart. Humans see only what is visible to the eyes, but the Lord sees into the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. This is what's happening in this story of Tamar, Potiphar's wife, Judah, Joseph. Instead of comparing the two women, though, we should be comparing the two hearts. We shouldn't compare Tamar and Potiphar's wife. We should be comparing Joseph and Tamar. These are the two hearts that are that God is looking at. These are the two righteous people, not the two women who are, we can look at both of them and we can say, oh, they're different in the way they behaved, but the ones that we should be holding up as examples are Tamar and Joseph. They are the pillars of virtue in the book of Genesis, in these chapters. They are the pillars that hold up the whole story, that for the rest of the covenant that we see throughout the scriptures. One runs toward the problem Tamar runs toward the problem. She deceives, she plays a trick, and she is called righteous. And one runs away from the problem the way he's supposed to. He obeys the Lord, he obeys his masters, and God blesses him. Running toward, running away, two who do different things, and yet the same outcome is they are called righteous. They are the pillars. Both save their families. Both of them are the ones we should use as our examples in these very strange little chapters next to each other. They are the ones who save the entire family by running toward or running away. We can't forget also that the writer of Genesis is consistently, I've said this over and again, the reason we can't read this chronologically is that we have to look for themes and motifs and repetitions and keywords. And just in these few little chapters right here, we see repetition. We see a point where Jacob is said, do you recognize this coat of Joseph? And Judah recognizes, they're the same word, these tokens from Tamar. There's comparisons. There's Judah's grief and Jacob's grief of their sons dying, or Judah deceiving his daughter-in-law Tamar, or Tamar counter deception. Lots of deceptions. You can do lots of comparisons of deceptions throughout all of these last few chapters. You can compare Hagar, the Egyptian slave of Sarah and Abraham, and compare her to the Egyptian wife of Commander Potiphar. So there's all kinds of contrast, there's comparisons, there's the seduction that Tamar does, seducing her father-in-law, and then of course the failed seduction of Potiphar's wife. All of these comparing and contrast. The coat, I mean, there's coat stuff all over the place. Repetition, coat of many colors. He loses the coat to Potiphar's wife. He gets royal robes or coats from Pharaoh. There's a very big significance in all of that. We have to read that. I was talking to one of the young people a couple of weeks ago after the lesson, and she was saying, I've been reading through Genesis, but I didn't see all the stuff that you had just told us about. And, I have the benefit of sitting there and looking through a lot of articles and Googling a lot, but in just a straight read though, we do have to train ourselves to reread the stories, compare, contrast, repetition, all that stuff we learned in English class. It still applies to the books of Genesis and all of these books. And now the book of Leviticus, that's a rough one. Deuteronomy, I'm not saying you do some deep dives into Google for figuring those books out, but in these kind of story books, you can definitely see what God is trying to do and what the writer was trying to do by trying to show us these different themes, motifs. So does anybody have any questions as we're finishing up? I just want you guys to have looked deeper at these stories of Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, and of Tamar, a story that I don't know if you guys had ever heard or really paid attention to before. Did anybody have thoughts or questions? You have to unmute and remember you're being recorded.
I really liked how you explained the interruption of the Joseph story with the Tamar story. I mean, that was really helpful of trying to figure out why would that story be placed in the middle of the chapters of Joseph. So that was good clarity. Thank you.
When I was starting to get ready for this lesson, my plan was actually I was going to do some shady ladies. That was my plan. I was going to do Potiphar's wife and Delilah, like take a look at some ladies, with some bad reputations. So I was like reading, I'll read through my Bible, I'm reading, and I'm reading the story, and I go, wait, what's this Tamar story here? And, I kind of like did a little Googling and was like, oh, wait, this is actually kind of important. I think I need to change my whole lesson plan here, because this is something that I've been skipping. It's been bothering me. Like, where did this story come from? And wow, I learned a lot. I hope you guys got maybe some of you besides you and me and Judy, maybe the rest of you knew this already, but I certainly did not realize how important this story was, and really until this afternoon when I was finishing up was when I really saw, oh, this is about these two hearts. This is about Tamar and Joseph. This isn't even, in my head until the very end, you could probably see it in the way I was doing it. I'd been comparing the two women. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, this is not about these two women. This is about these two people who had hearts for God. I honestly, it kind of blew me away myself, trying to see it. And I've been learning quite a bit. Yes, Deborah, did you have a question?
Oh no, William was driving by and he bumped his horn. I was just saying hi. Sorry, I love the story.
Waving, and I think you got a question. I thought I was very impressed. Oh, Deborah's got a question, and you're just waving at your man. God, all right. Okay, no more waving at people.
No, I'm like Judy. I really like the story of Tamar. I have actually used it with one of my friends before when she wanted to.
Wait, you cut out, and I really need, like, you cut out, and I really need to know what she wanted. Please tell me.
No, I can't. It was my friend Carla, but I can't. Yeah, it was something that she wanted to do.
Okay, well, like, maybe don't tell me all.
No, I'll tell you tomorrow.
Okay,
don't forget Tamar.
Okay, that's killing me. Now, yeah, I can't wait till tomorrow. So none of the rest of y'all are ever going to know that story, what she wanted. Anyway, so yeah, a very important stories, for us. Some depth. We as women, we have to look deeper at these stories. So much, honestly, of the Bible is used against us, and we do it against ourselves. We have to really see the importance of these women on the edge, and women who are a part of the most important aspect. We are people who are saying we want to serve God, we want to follow his ways, we don't want to mess up, but we often can make ourselves feel guilty and live in a conviction that is not coming from him, that we've done something wrong or aren't following his ways because we're immodest or have desires that we're trying to figure out how they work within his big plan. So seeking him first, seeking his wisdom, being a Tamar, being a Joseph, those are all good people to admire and to stand up and hold up as our virtuous people. Anybody else have anything? If not, I will end our recording, and next week I will have at least one more woman, or maybe we'll do two again. I'm not going to tell you yet who we're doing because I'm still working on it. But we're going to jump right out of Genesis. No more Genesis. It doesn't look like there's no more good women in Genesis to study. We have studied one of my favorite women, Zipporah, Moses' wife. We have actually done that lesson before. So if you want to look back in our notes on our Forest Fire teaching class resources, there's some great lessons about Zipporah. Oh my gosh, that woman, she saved everybody. And once again, a woman on the edge who we really know very little about. So keep looking at these women and all these people that are on the edges and say, God, make me like them, give me courage and give me strength. And if I'm on the edge, that's okay, because I can still make a difference. Most of us are on the edge. I'm definitely on the edge. That's okay. Be on the edge and do what is right.